guys, Brief O'Shea here. Today my guest is Rocking Mr. E from Rocking Philosophy. Many weeks ago, Rocking Mr. E was kind enough to feature me on his channel. When I looked into his material, I was stunned by the level of intellect, thorough research, his accurate yet brutal honesty, and the thoughtfulness he put into his work. His videos are thought-provoking and very insightful on the ongoing fight against globalism and the continued Marxist lies perpetuated by the left. He most recently made a video called UK in Crisis, where he spoke of the ongoing horrors of the migrant crisis taking place in the United Kingdom. I listened with keen interest, as I once lived in the UK, and I continue to be horrified daily by the weekly or sometimes even daily occurrences taking place there. I strongly recommend that everyone check out the video. So thank you, Rocking Mr. E, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, and that was a very flattering indictment of my work. Thank you very much for that.
Well, you deserve it. I've seen such incredible videos coming out. I especially loved the whole difference between socialism, communism, and Marxism, because I think people tend to put it into one box sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for a while now, and my channel's a bit of a slow burner, but it's getting bigger over time, and the growth is accelerating. But I've covered a lot of things over the years, and recently I've been going into even occult and religious things, and because I try to be a big picture kind of person, so I'll cover a lot of things. I guess it's a little bit like Stefan Molyneux in that regard. I try not to restrict what I cover.
He's a good inspiration and something to aspire toward, because he has such a large audience, and I think you're doing really well.
Thank you. And I've also been keeping up with your work, and been very impressed by your red pilling over the last year or so.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this video you made, UK in Crisis, I found it to be so informative. Thank you for making it and helping to spread awareness, since you're so close to what's happening in your country. And now, you made a very compelling argument for why the United Kingdom is being pushed inevitably, it seems, toward a crisis with the numerous attacks we've seen in the UK recently. Do you feel as though this has progressed very quickly, or that it's been steadily building for a while now?
Well, it's like, I think this is a fairly common pattern. You won't notice it at first, and then all of a sudden, it'll feel like things are accelerating faster. And you'll notice in my UK in Crisis video that you mentioned, I talked about the 4 stages of ideological subversion, and you find that once that crisis kicks in, each stage is faster. So I think the concern I have is that once we start getting closer to a crisis stage, everything will be happening very quickly. So obviously over the last few months, it's been quite chaotic in the UK, and it has been very demoralizing. So, yeah, I mean, there's no easy answer to that other than the fact that I've been very inspired by Yuri Bezmenov's interpretation of ideological subversion. I'm not sure if you've watched that, but it's definitely worth watching.
I haven't, but I'll link it down below for my viewers so they can see it too.
I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of your viewers
Wait a minute, is he that Russian guy that defected? Yes, I have seen it, and that was incredible. I have seen that.
And isn't it very uncanny? The way it's described, the subversion is described, you could almost take that description and apply it to our society as it is today in the West, and all the leftist subversion we're experiencing. So my concern is that we could be reaching that crisis point. And once you kind of reach that crisis point, it's something like a civil war will take place, or an external war where an external enemy will come in, sort of beckoned by people, leftists within your society who want them to take over. That's kind of the concern I'm feeling at the moment.
I don't blame you. I mean, I remember listening to some of his talks, in particular this one video that comes to mind, and I think it was filmed like in the late 70s or the early 80s, and I was thinking, my goodness, if it was true then, it's even more so true now, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. I mean, certainly when you're looking at the first stage, which is demoralization, and the second stage, which is destabilization, we're absolutely in the destabilization stage now. I mean, this is why, you constantly got different sort of clashes between ethnic minorities. You've got the rise of Islam in the West now. Constant terrorist attacks. The left is sort of propping them up and emboldening them. And you really do feel there's this electricity in the air where at any moment something could tip, something could kick off. You're on a knife edge and you could slip at any moment.
It's really frightening to me. As I said once, as I said before, I lived in the UK, and I could see the political correctness just gone mad, and it was one of the driving forces for me wanting to come home, only to realize when I got back to the US, we were equally infected with it. With the clamping down on free speech, particularly in the UK, and with the police now, from what I've heard, raiding homes for people who commit hate speech via social media, do you think people such as yourself are going to be able to keep doing this and speaking up, or are you going to have to tweak it a little bit?
It's a very difficult question to answer that in an accurate sense, but what I would say is, on one hand, we've got like jihadis going to Syria and Iraq to fight for ISIS. I mean, as many as 850, it's probably more. Whatever figure they give you, you can bet it's conservative. And these people are then coming back to the UK. They're being let here after they've been trained. And they can say, oh, well, I didn't like it out there. I regret it. But of course, these are trained operatives now. So, and these people are allowed to walk the streets. They're not being, I think they should be in internment. Frankly, I just don't see. And if they're not British nationals, why are they even here? And that's a quite soft approach, but even that's not acceptable. And then on the other hand, if you say the slightest thing online, you're getting a knock on the door from the police. If you say the wrong thing on Facebook or something along those lines, and you've got these hate speech, hate crime sort of numbers you can call now, hotlines backed by Sadiq Khan.
There's hotlines?
And Sadiq, yeah, there is literally a hotline now that Sadiq Khan is endorsing, and he's paying for like $1 million, something ridiculous like £1 million to fund this, where you can call up and complain about things like Islamophobia. So this is the thing about Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor of London, for those that don't know, and I'm sure there's many that I'm not sure there's many that wouldn't. But Sadiq Khan stands up there and he preaches tolerance. But the only things that really come out of his mouth, and generally Muslims, this is the problem, is that it's not real Islam whenever these terrorists do things, and Islamophobia. That's all you get from these people. And that's very much the state, that's jihad. That's what happens in jihad.
It's a pure form of Islam, yeah.
So the left and Islam are very similar. They use the same sort of tactics of agitation. They agitate their opponent and capitalize on the reaction to play the victim. So, and whatever you do, they say, well, it's your fault. It's your fault. We're going to genocide you. Well, it's your fault. Or we didn't do it. It's vile. It's disgusting. And unless we actually stand up and say, enough's enough, you have to take responsibility for what you're doing. You are not a victim. We have welcomed you into our countries, and this is how you behave. You isolate yourselves. Your communities are harboring terrorists. Even the Muslims out there that would want to just put their heads down and get on with it or integrate, you intimidate and threaten them. Then unless you address these things, then the problem will continue to get worse. And it's a guarantee, because we've seen it in other places. I mean, you can use Yugoslavia as an example. You can use, Lebanon as an example. You can use Cyprus, where my family come from, as an example. Past actions are a good indication of future actions. That's and that's pretty consistent across the board, especially when it comes to Islam and especially when it comes to the left.
But most people don't even know what happened in Lebanon. I think it was Brigitte Gabriel? Brigitte Gabriel wrote a wonderful book on that subject, and I wish people like her got more notoriety, but of course their voices are clamped down because they speak of what Islam truly is. And same with Tommy Robinson. He gave a whole speech or video, I think recently, where he talked about that when he was studying the Quran in a jail cell. He realized why all these Muslims throughout his life never associated with them, because it was in the Quran. Do not associate with the infidel and do not assimilate with them. It was actually written there.
No, that's exactly it. And the problem is, these people coming out and defending Islam, whether they're non-Muslims or Muslims, it's infuriating because the evidence is there, and of course the behavior around you. is an indication of what that book says. But of course, I've kind of reached the point. The only way I can actually deal with the place we're at now is starting to accept that these people are insincere. They're insincere, or they're just cowards and virtue signalers. There's that, or it could be a combination of these things. But you're not going to reason with them. And the more of these people you build up in your society, the more this is how you reach crisis, because you've just got so many people there now that you're not going to reason with. You're not going to be able to appeal to in any level. And if we continue down this road where we keep letting more migrants and Muslims into the country, we keep propping up, and of course we haven't even talked about Jeremy Corbyn as well, which is another thing that I mentioned in my video. We're in a very bad place in the UK politically. If we keep propping these people up, then we are really going to reach a tipping point. And I feel as though you can, as I said earlier, there's an electricity in the air, and it's very worrying. It feels as though we are reaching that point now where a crisis could well hit at any moment.
One spark could just set everything aflame. That's how I felt recently as well. And when you say you think the left is just insincere, I try to think of that myself sometimes. Like, are they legitimately just ignorant about these things? Like, they don't know? Are they brainwashed? Or are they just complete evil? And I think about it in my own terms of my red pilling. When I was a liberal, I remember my religion theology professor getting up in front of the class and saying, Islam is so peaceful. I've been to so many Islamic countries. They treated me wonderful. The Pakistani people were so nice to me. And I'm like, okay, maybe that was true. And at the time I thought, oh, I guess the sensational media is just portraying Islam crazy or something. But I realized later that I had it switched. But I think a lot of it stems from the schools, and we hold our professors up on these pedestals of truth, and maybe it's a combination of all that. The media is telling them that, their professors are telling them that. So I don't know how much of it is just indoctrination in these schools, or if they are legitimately trying to gaslight us.
It's a combination of things. Like anything, there's not a single answer. I think when it comes, it's a form of brainwashing. It's a form of, it's like a cult, and you can break it down to this sort of structure. So within that, you're going to get people who are of a very low IQ who are manipulated and exploited. Because the lower your IQ, the more emotional you are. You can't reason, so you have to appeal to a base emotion within the human being, the limbic system in particular, where all those emotions are kept. But then the more intelligent lefties, I'm not sure how much a lot of them believe their own bullshit, excuse my French, but yeah. And a good example of that of late would be Anita Sarkeesian. A lot of people are questioning whether she actually believes half the stuff she says. Now, if you look at her background, she does come across as a bit of a hustler, a con artist who went and learned her craft and then went out there and did her, and basically created this narrative that would benefit her. So, this is what I mean. I think a lot of the people on the upper echelons of the left, or within a cult in general, they are just trying to manipulate and exploit people for their own benefit. So I think it's basically a two-tier structure in that sense.
Widely disturbing. I'm noticing a pattern within the UK that's very similar to the US, in that the United Kingdom seems to cook for Islam and defend it no matter what happens, the same way in the United States tends to do for blacks, and black crime is astronomically high in the US, but causes like Black Lives Matter remarkably stay afloat because the fake mainstream media networks support them. Do you think that the people in the UK are slowly kind of waking up to the dangers surrounding Islam and the migrant immigration, or does political correctness seem to still reign supreme?
Well, I think a lot of people are awake. A heck of a lot of people are awake. But the problem is controlled opposition. Now, a good example of this would be the general election that just went. It was pathetic.
I've heard.
The Tory party were the quintessential cucks. They basically threw the election. They had a rubbish manifesto. There was nothing traditionally conservative about it whatsoever. very poor policies on taxation and economics. It was fundamentally pushing things like, censorship of the internet. That's the big thing now. We're going to solve the problem of Islam, of radical Islam, by censoring the internet. When as I said in my UK in Crisis video, you've got people being radicalized in parks. And I neglected to mention that this has even been going on in my home city of Cardiff. I wanted to mention that and I forgot. It's a common thing that people are getting radicalized on the streets, and yet we're going to change everything by censoring the internet.
Which is crazy, because Cardiff is such a lovely little city. I've been there, and it's quite isolated up there, and people are getting radicalized even there.
Well, Cardiff is a city, and no city is safe anymore, So the Tories, they threw the election. So Corbyn, he didn't have a decent opposition. So and it's deliberately devised in that way, because every time I've looked at this in detail over the years, the left just subvert and infiltrate everything. They say if you get a party like the Tories or UKIP, they infiltrate those parties with stooges and entryists. And they just try to create infighting and just make that party more left-wing. So, of course, in the last election, people took a look at the Tory party and thought, this is a rubbish party. This party's rubbish. They don't represent me. They didn't even talk about Brexit very much, the Tories, within the election. And, of course, UKIP are just losing the plot. They're close to folding. They're actually I think potentially there could even be a brand change. It's in dire straits. So who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for? So there's all these people out there who want to vote for a right-wing party. And of course, that's even the word right-wing. People don't even get what it is anymore half the time. But I'm talking about, people who are more nationalistic, smaller government, more economically liberal, more traditionally conservative in terms of social values as well. These kinds of things you would put on the right in any kind of in any kind of logical sense, and what people would often say is on the right as well. But we're not getting that, are we? So what are people supposed to do? What are all these people supposed to do? And who are they going to vote for? And this is why I'm shouting at the rooftops, saying, from the rooftops, I'm shouting that we need to get ourselves together in the West in general and have proper right-wing alternatives. And we just don't have that. So I think that's hopefully that explains the issue here. The left doesn't have a decent opposition, and we don't have a proper right in the West
you've
anymore.
Got two-faced Theresa May, or you've got a communist James Corbyn. The options are just disgusting. Something you have touched on and that I've noticed as well is that people, it seems as though they aren't allowed to feel anger anymore. I've noticed this so much with leftists in general, where they claim they want to beat the hell out of hate and stop hatred. But to me, there's a natural balance between love and hate, and you can't have one without the other. Do you agree with that, or does the UK even recognize that they're in pain right now?
Well, I've got this great quote here, which I've already, which I would like to sort of read, which I think epitomizes this. This is from Saint Augustine. It was going around as a meme on the internet after one of the terrorist attacks, and Paul Joseph Watson put it in one of his videos then. It's, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain the way they are. And I think that it epitomizes exactly what I was saying in that video, really, in my video on the UK in crisis. In other words, anger, if you channel that in a righteous way, in a focused way, that is what gives you the courage to act, to do something. So what the left are trying to do is they're trying to keep us in a state of sort of, of appeasement and sorrow and sadness and all the time. And then, because then we can be henpecked and bullied, and we will accept our being conquered. Now, the thing is, at the same time, they'll say, if you're so angry, the left will say, if you even feel any anger at all, they'll say, look how angry you are, and look, that's not right, that's hateful. But then look at the way the left behave at every moment. The slightest thing happens. We had that Grenfell Tower thing in the UK, and and then we also had that guy who I forgot his name now, but there was actually a guy from Cardiff, and he went into a bunch of people in a van who just came out of a mosque,
Yeah,
and
I recall.
his name eludes me. Yeah, and from those two incidents alone, the left flipped out. They had a day of hate. They had a day of rage, a day of rage from that. So those slightest things, and if you add it all up, there were like 35 people that died over the last couple of months from terror, let's say 2 months, 3 months or so, and all these people injured, and all these other things that have been taking place. I mean, Brexit isn't certain. There's so many things to be angry about. The fact we don't have a real representation in this country unless you're on the left, or the left or the far left. There's so much to get angry about, and unless we do get angry, none of these things are going to change. But at the same time, the left, they can get as angry as they want over the slightest thing, because they know that's how you need to show the powers that be that you're prepared to kick up a stink if you don't get what you want.
Yeah, it's hypocritical because they're always using that line. I think of Justin Trudeau pretty much saying, if you get mad at your enemy, they win, which just makes no kind of logical sense to me anyway.
If you get that, but that only applies if you're
On the right.
If you're trying on the right. The left can get as angry as they want. The left want you to want an opposition that lies down. If you look at the pattern of politics over the last 50 years, since since the 1960s, this is what the left has done. They've turned us into a bunch of cucks.
Yeah, essentially.
Cuck conservatives who just lie down for everything. And it's a difficult thing when you start questioning when the time is to stand up and make a difference, and even to become more violent. And I'm not advocating violence, but where's the line? Because things are going to get worse. So what will happen is you will reach the point where you've got nothing to lose, and that's when when the really dangerous things can happen. But of course, I think the left know this. The globalists, the establishment know this, and they're gradually closing the walls in around us. And of course, with Muslims flooding into the country as well. If I look at the country that I'm from, Cyprus, what happened with the Greeks when they said, we want self-determination, we want to sort of merge back with Greece, is they then turned to the Turks to do the dirty work for the British. The British turned to the Turks to do the dirty work for them. Now, that pattern is repeated in other parts of the world as well, particularly in Yugoslavia, a similar pattern you'll find. But now we're finding this being turned against people in Western Europe as well. So now we can see how if the British, the indigenous Europeans get uppity, there's lots of non-Europeans around who you can rile up to do your dirty work for you.
That's a frightening thought. It seems to me that the left is so eager to politicize every single one of these little tragedies. If someone is shot, then we need to get rid of the guns and have more gun control, for example. But the right is so cucked, as you said, when it comes to using action when these tragedies happen to achieve the goals they have in mind. They always say, we're better than the left that politicizes everything. But I feel like people on the right need to take some notes on how the left gets things done and potentially use these tragic events to get immigration reform passed, as well as other key issues. What do you think? Do we need to be fighting fire with fire?
In some ways, basically, I think whatever the left does to us, we should do to them.
Okay, good man.
I'm actually reading. SJWs Always Lie by Vox Day at the moment. I haven't actually got around to reading that book. I haven't finished reading it, but it's a great book, and that's one of the things that's said in there, and I think that's a great piece of advice. You need to throw at the left whatever they throw at you. Fight fire with fire, yeah. I agree with that. The problem is that, again, we need to look, past actions are a good indication of future actions. So if we look at, say, somewhere like South Africa, if we look at Cyprus, which is close to my heart, being Greek Cypriot, or if you look at Yugoslavia and all these other places where we've had issues which have contradicted what the left want, they have now taken over all the institutions. That long march through the institutions that Gramsci talked about is well and truly completed now. So, for example, in South Africa, the people think there might be a civil war there at some point. But as soon after everything the Boers have taken, in South Africa, they're well within their right to stand up and start fighting back. But as soon as they do that, the entire establishment, the media, and everything else in between will paint them as the bad guys. So I think we need to get to a point where we realize this, and we need to adapt to that, because that's just the way it is. So you've got a guy like Tommy Robinson, for example, who is frankly the guy's he's a national hero, and the amount of things he takes, but he's reached a point now where he's so supported that anything the establishment throws at him, he's got like a war chest waiting on the side where people will just fund him, because he's constantly in court. So he'll have like 2 top-level barristers in court with him, lawyers, and to help him fight the good fight. And that's one way around it, I suppose. But we need to adapt to this environment, because the left, or the globalists, whatever you want to call this threat, because there are many names you can give it in some ways, they control the system right now. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to adapt to this?
We have to support our heroes like Tommy Robinson, I think, when this type of thing happens. I loved how whenever he has an interview with the mainstream media, or when he's going into court, or when he's getting ready to get arrested, or he's being harassed, he just takes out Periscope. And he shows everybody so that they don't have this one narrative out there that the media puts out where anybody he's arguing against is the victim. And I think it really helps to spread the truth. So in a way, maybe that's why they're attacking social media so much, is because we're using social media to make sure that the other side of the narrative gets out there. It's been a powerful weapon.
It has, and the establishment certainly are aware of that. And of course, one of the things I wanted to say earlier when I was talking about censorship with the internet, there's the dark web for the terrorists, for the real threats out there, and the establishment know that. Of course, they must know that. We can't keep assuming these people are stupid. It's all very contrived, and I'm starting to see patterns of how they're using the Hegelian dialectic. They've got a problem reaction solution kind of thing, where they already know what the solution is, but they're creating these crises to get a certain result that they want. So the internet at the end of the day is very important to us, and they're trying to take that away from us under the cover of stopping terrorism, but this is something that really does worry me. And you asked me earlier what I can do about that if the internet closes in around me. Once we reach that point, I think we are we're going to reach a point basically where we have to really decide whether it's time to go further in our actions. And I really hope we don't reach that point. It's not something I want. I mean, I've got a family, I've got a lot to lose. In some ways, I've got quite a comfortable life. I'm quite lucky. But I also realize that if you don't act, your life everything that you value will disappear around you. So this is why we have to be able to see a few steps further ahead than where we are. And things are definitely getting worse.
Speaking of that, I heard various people in the alt-right say that we can't become SJWs of the right, and pretty much condemning anyone who takes any sort of physical action, even if it's just protesting. Should people in the United Kingdom start showing up physically, or is that even possible at this point?
It would be great to have mass protests. I really have been racking my brain thinking, why aren't these things happening? Why aren't there mass protests? But we know kind of part of the reason is you've got a lot to lose. And people on the right have got jobs, they've got lives, they've got families. The people on the left, as a rule, they don't have those things. They've got time, a lot of them are unemployed, or they're professional activists, or they're students. So there's a whole sort of, there's a whole plethora of people there you can draw from. But, whether we should revert to more overt violent actions, it's difficult. I certainly think we should be defending ourselves.
Maybe not violent actions, but just like even protesting without being called SJWs.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think we are in a war.
A culture war.
We're in a culture war at the very least. And, when you're in a war, I'm always reminded of that line. When I think of a good way of describing this, I'm reminded of that line from the film The Untouchables, wherein I believe Sean Connery says, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You have to be able to match whatever is being thrown at you. And there was that, I can't remember which protest it was in the US. It was one in California, wasn't it, where the alt-right stood up and fought back
The
against the
Battle of Berkeley.
Antifas. That's right, that's the one. And they kicked their butts. So I think if we do actually rise up and defend ourselves at the very least, we'll do all right. Mm-hmm. The problem is that, you've got the police, they're going to either stand back and let the left beat the hell out of you.
In a lot of areas they do. Of course, they're not on our side, yeah.
And the problem is when you do step, because you probably win in a conflict. But the thing is, the police, on the other hand, they could drag you through the courts. And again, we've seen that, I said, with Base Stickman. Mm-hmm. We've seen that with Tommy Robinson in the UK. You're always having to take a calculated risk, yes, aren't you, about whether it's worth it or not. I mean, I don't know what I would do if I was in that situation. It really would depend. You have to take you have to make a calculation in the moment, don't you, and see, well, my how much am I in jeopardy here? Is it worth me taking a punch? If it's just out of frustration, it's not worth it. You have to be smart about it, I guess. But for now, I think that's the place we're at. But whether, I certainly am not against using defensive force where necessary.
How do you feel about this notion that tolerance is a virtue?
Well, tolerance. The thing is with tolerance is if you tolerate, there has to be limits, don't there? You can't tolerate absolutely everything, because then the only thing that becomes intolerable is if you don't tolerate absolutely everything. If that makes any sense. So in other words, so you have to have limits. And the other thing that I've been looking, I've been going on more of a spiritual journey lately, and certainly we think. We have to stop thinking with our hearts all the time. Certainly the left thinks with their heart all the time. You have to engage your neocortex and think, well, if I let these people into my country who have got a totally different way of life to me, and I keep letting these people in and don't even give them time to integrate and have a sensible level of immigration rather than just mass immigration, and then anyone can go from Libya up to Sicily and then just come into the rest of Europe and basically just replace the whole of Europe and all these insane things that are happening. If you don't think about this logically, then your tolerance is going to end up destroying you. And okay, maybe people on the right can think with their hearts a little bit more here and there. But I'm starting to wonder whether we need a bit more balance, head and the heart. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And maybe that's the solution. Maybe that's where we can actually reach a common ground and stop this insanity. But it's probably wishful thinking, to be honest, based on the other things I've already said.
Did you have any feeling one way or the other when Sadiq Khan was voted in as London's mayor? Were you worried? Were there signs of his inadequacy from the start?
Well, there was a lot of evidence he was in cahoots with a lot of radical Muslims. I'm trying to, that was well documented. I made a video on that.
Okay, I'll have to link that.
So basically, it's called. Trying to remember the name of that video.
You can tell me later, and I'll put it in the link down below.
Yeah, sure. But it's been well documented from the very beginning that Sadiq Khan has been in cahoots with a lot of radical Muslims. So from the very beginning, people were very unsure about him. He said things, for example, one good example of what Sadiq Khan has said is that, moderate Muslims are Uncle Toms. So did you hear about that?
No, I didn't. Ew.
So, he's a vile character. And even when you see him coming up and making statements after terrorist attacks and the like, he almost has this look of satisfaction on his face, like he's kind of smiling. Yeah, that's the impression I get. If you look at his face, it's like, satisfaction at the way things are going and almost rubbing it in your face, what's going on around you and how you can do nothing about it. But he's definitely not somebody to be trusted. If you look into his background, you'll see that he's got a very shady past when it comes to the support of many radical Muslims across the world, including in the US, actually.
That's frightening. I mean, it kind of fits this comment I got on one of my videos recently when someone said a radical Muslim wants to chop your head off. A moderate Muslim wants a radical Muslim to chop your head off. And I feel like Sadiq Khan fits that slot of once others radicals to chop your head off. So maybe that's where that satisfaction comes from a little bit. Maybe that's where that smile comes from.
Yeah, I mean, and the things he's done since he's become mayor. I mean, just look at the state of London since he's become
Yeah.
mayor. He hasn't even been a mayor for 2 years. And look at where it's got. He's been removing adverts of bikini models because of sexism. And this is where feminism and Islam kind of
Right.
ally themselves. You can see how the left and Islam can ally because of course feminists don't like women being
I don't like
objectified.
beauty.
You know, yeah, and Islam just want women to have bags over their
Right.
heads. So basically, they can actually move in the same direction, even though they want different things. But of course, I mean, how do you square that circle? How do you square the circle that Islam wants to put bags over people's heads and feminists basically think that women are being objectified and, women are treated so much like objects in Islamic country, in some Islam, in generally in Islamic countries, but in particular when they have to wear burqas,
That's just the
that they're
radicals.
not
That's
allowed to
just
be.
the radicals there. No, I'm just kidding.
I know exactly. Well, that's generally the response you would get, but super frustrating. Super frustrating.
Yeah, I remember meeting some feminists when I was over there, and there was always that blockade I would always get where they couldn't make that connection. Okay, you're for feminism, you're for women being able to do what they want. Well, shouldn't that model be able to wear that bikini in that ad if she wants to, if that's her choice? If you're for women doing what they want? Oh, no, no, no. It just, that's one of the reasons I got away from feminism was when someone held up a mirror to me and I saw all the hypocrisy and that things just didn't align. But I don't think all women or people in general are capable of doing that. I think I heard Stephen Molyneux say 10% of women are able, or women, 10% of people are able to reach a new conclusion through logic and reason, and the other 90 just can't. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think it's to do with
That,
IQ.
yeah,
There's something
absolutely.
going, and then I mean, so if you look at an average IQ, I don't know what you would put that on the world stage, but let's just say that if you need to have an IQ above
Right.
90 to have any chance of using, to have a decent chance of engaging your neocortex and being rational, and a good percentage of the world aren't like that. Including certain white people as well. I mean, it's a sad thing, but you need to be smart enough to be logical. And I'm not saying you need to be a genius either. I'm not a genius. You just need to have a half decent level of intellect, average by let's just say 90 to 100
Yeah.
for argument's sake, which is about, and then you've got a half a chance. But the thing is, there are ways of manipulating you to downplay and to sort of
Mm-hmm.
suppress that through things like brainwashing. Brainwashing stops you being rational. So this is why you've got things like postmodernism and other kinds of sophistry, which is designed to make you not think. And then the cult leaders, the authoritarian personalities step in and do the thinking for you. So yeah, that's a pretty simple, well, a quick explanation of what I would say about that, to be
Well, it's
honest.
a simple explanation to a big concept, and I think that's what people need in order to be able to understand the bigger concepts is a simplistic way of looking at it. So I'm sure a lot of people appreciate that though, because there's some of these concepts are
Mm.
really big, and it took me a while to wrap my head around them. You know?
It takes a while. I mean, I've been always been somebody who likes to, you know, try to be philosophical and look at the big picture and ask questions in life. So I mean, I'm 38 this year, 39 this year. God, 39. I'm 40 now. So
Shh.
that's
It's okay.
I know. So I've spent my life going on this journey in some ways, and certainly once I started hit my 30s, I became much more conservative. And you just build up this picture of learning about things and trying to figure things out, and it builds up a tapestry of the way you think about things then. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen for everyone, but that's kind of how I've arrived at my place of my way of thinking about things
Yeah,
anyway.
I think 30 is a very average age, like between 30s and 40s, that's when people sort of veer away from the left because they actually have to get a job, actually have to get an income, work things out, and they get very protective of their income because taxes, and they realize that taking money by force through taxation won't exactly help them to any degree. So I think 30, 40, you also get to be having a family by that time generally. So I think that's pretty normal as far as a age bracket for people veering away from liberalism into conservatism.
Yeah, and of course, the whole liberalism and conservative thing can be quite a grey area. I mean, if I was going to simply describe myself, for example, I mean, it's difficult to put labels on. Even if you want to talk about being alt-right, it's difficult to decide who's alt-right sometimes, never mind alt-light. But I would say I'm more fiscally conservative, socially conservative, but I'm definitely still much more economically liberal. So when that comes to, the alt-right, there is, like, I watched a quite interesting video by Millennial Woes where he said, in some ways the alt-right is more left-wing, certainly on economic issues. I'm not sure how sort of set in stone that is, but you can just see how complicated these things can get,
They do get very complex, and I don't think the alt-right really has an answer to all those things yet. It's still very much in the beginning stages. If we ever were, I say we as in like me being alt-right, if we ever were to get on a bigger platform where we actually had a little bit of political power, we'd actually have to come to some consensus as far as, okay, now we've got a little bit of power, what is it exactly that we want? We know we don't want any more immigration. We know about white genocide. We know we want to have more than just one narrative in the media, but beyond that, that's where it gets complicated.
And this is the thing. There is a certain element within the alt-right that, like big government, I'm heavily against that myself. But I do very much recognize the problem of white genocide. It's very real. It's a very real problem. But there are certain, I'm not a believer in this idea that Hitler was misrepresented or any of that, and I've made that perfectly clear on my channel. In some ways, I think Nazism has done a lot of damage to white identity because we've been defamed with being Nazis all the time. And if you really look at Nazism, I'm not even sure that's a very accurate representation of white identity in any real sense of the word, because Hitler disagreed with a lot of other white people as well, and certainly me being Greek, a lot of people have been quite outspoken about this idea that I'm not really white myself, which comes from this idea of Hitler saying that basically the Northern Europeans are the true whites, So it gets quite complicated in that regard. But of course, there's taxation as well. I think you need low taxation to give for a society to prosper. You can protect your borders and have a very liberal economy that helps you to thrive. So you can afford things like a family, you can start businesses, you can have those local communities that prevents things like corporatism from setting in. And that's the grey area again, with certain elements who would be more sympathetic to the let's say, a neo-Nazi way of thinking of things. So these are the kinds of things that need to be addressed. I don't know how easy that's going to be, but speaking personally, I just always speak my mind. And I find I agree with certain people on certain issues, like the white genocide issue, for example. I think it's a very real problem, as I've already stated, but I'm not necessarily going to agree with people who agree with white genocide on other things. So maybe we should be breaking things down to single issues in a lot of ways, and I've certainly been thinking about that might be a way to go as well. It's much more difficult to co-opt things then.
So the right is always labeled as extreme and hateful when we are the ones actually providing answers and not just candlelit vigils. I feel as though anything truthful is labeled as extreme now. That's where we are. Normality of reality and truth are considered extreme. In your opinion, how did we get to this point?
I think there's an underlying thread with this question to what I've already said. You need to make truth a bad thing. You need to make truth subjective, and you do that by by brainwashing people, by teaching people not to think with the higher functions of their brain, the things that helped us to evolve to become the apex predator on the planet, the most successful animal on the planet, the most successful species. So you need to dumb down the higher functions of your brain and then you basically get people to think emotionally all the time. That's how I would say it's occurred. But of course, there's an IQ issue here as well. So it's not just brainwashing. It's not just conditioning through ideologies and the like, or even a cult like Scientology. So maybe if we can arrive at a point where we actually recognize brainwashing and the exploitation of lower IQ people, we might have a chance, because clearly demagogues know what they're doing. People like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK election was promising the voters everything under the sun, free this, free that. None of these things could be guaranteed. You could never deliver on them, and the country would be bankrupt. Why is that allowed? Why are we allowed to do that? Why are we allowed to exploit the less intelligent or the more emotional in this way? That's a serious flaw in the system. So we need to get people to understand truth, in the sense of what's objective, what can happen when it comes to economics, for example. Maybe some welfare programs here and there would be a compromise, but you have to have a strong market economy to have productivity. Right. Things like that. And we don't teach kids any of this stuff anymore.
We really don't.
And that's by design.
It is. There were so many classes in school I wish I'd had, like how to pay my taxes or how does jury duty work. And we never got anything like that. The first time I tried to do my taxes, I was lost. There are just so many basic life things that we don't teach our kids, but apparently I was absent the day that we missed the B times table. They suddenly had letters next to the numbers. I didn't know what that was about. Apparently that was, I missed the day we did the B.
Is that algebra?
Yeah. Which I've never used once since I left school. A little bit from Billy Connolly there.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to discuss with you was there are so many people out there wondering how we explain this level of crisis to our children. And as a father, you said you had a family. What advice would you give on how to educate your children on the madness of the world that we're experiencing, and at what age should they start?
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in the innocence of childhood. It's not, we see the way the left is trying to sexualize children, for example, and that's one of the reasons why I'm against it, because the innocence of childhood is important. Having a great childhood where you don't necessarily see the bad things in life, it's a good thing. It gives you a good foundation. So certainly now my daughter is 7, my oldest, and she's been coming home and saying some shocking things to me, like, for example, they've talked about Joe Cox, who was killed during the break. Do you remember that? Joe Cox getting killed? That
Britain First, yeah.
They mentioned that in
which has no place in school, really. Do you think?
And well, not at all. But the trouble is, they present it as just a homage to a good person, and it's all very political. So when that was mentioned, I had to sit down and talk to her about that. When she's coming home and talking about the school is a green school as well.
They have,
and I have to talk to her about things. Well, in the UK, we have like certain. You can be like a specialist schools. You can be like a green school or a sports school or something along those lines.
Okay.
And in my local school is a green school, so then they tend to have a focus on environmental issues. So she's come home and talked about that a bit, and I've had to say to her, well, global warming is not really that certain, and the idea that human beings can do that much damage to the earth, does that really make a lot of sense to you? We're really small, the earth is really big, and trying to explain it to her in a childlike way, but not trying to push her too hard, But so what I'm doing is I'm reacting to the world around her and me, and then gradually teaching her things as she gets older, rather than trying to just push everything on her and impose my worldview onto her. I want to teach her to be a critical thinker. Right. And the reason why she cottoned onto the Joe Cox thing was because I talked to her about some political issues here and there, because they come up naturally like that. And she came to me and said, when you told me the other day about thinking for yourself, when I heard that about Joe Cox, I thought of what you said. So you're kind of giving her the tools she needs to be her own person, and then you're not going to be brainwashed by someone else. And if you don't talk to your kids about politics and philosophy, Somebody else is going to do that for you. I think we've had an attitude where we don't talk, as a society in some ways, where we don't talk about politics or we don't talk about religion, and even parents don't with their kids. But I'll tell you this much: if you don't talk about these things with your kids, the Marxist professors and teachers in school will, you know?
Absolutely. What do you think is coming for the future of the United Kingdom?
I wish I could say it was good things, but the trouble is there is a lot of uncertainty, like I've already said. And I mean, Brexit isn't.
Do you think it's going to happen at all?
Certainly, I want to stay optimistic, but I've been I've been making a lot of warnings about things that have been going on down the line. I've made a lot of predictions on my channel, and I'm out there on record with that. But we've got to keep fighting to the bitter end. I'm not going to, because, you know, this is the thing. The other thing the left wants to do is demoralize you. So if you're demoralized and you give up, then there's no way for you to, well, they win, don't they? They win, which is what they want. So as much as I think Brexit is not only uncertain, but likely not to happen, we got to keep fighting. We'll get some kind of Brexit. We won't get a Brexit. We'll stay in the single market. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the EU structure.
A little bit. So you'll probably get, you'll stay in the single market, so you'll get like a half-baked kind of Brexit.
Yeah. So because we're still in the single market, all the rules, the control that the EU has over Britain will still apply, but we'll be able to do something like go and have our own trade deals around the world. But then we won't get a seat on the table within the EU. So it's a trade-off there. But the EU will still have control over all our courts, our fishing waters.
That's awful.
It'll be. They'll still have the same level of control. The ECJ, the European Court of Justice, will still have control over ours. Supreme rule. So it's an ugly situation, and of course the issue is, as I've already mentioned, with political parties in the UK. Nigel Farage has just basically disappeared off the scene.
I really wish he hadn't too. I feel like England still needed him.
I feel as though Nigel Farage is really at risk of destroying any legacy that he might have if he doesn't get his act together, because he disappeared too early. The job wasn't done, and he said on the day of the election result, the general election result, that he's going to decide within a week whether he runs for leader of UKIP again. And there's been no sign of him since. So I don't know what he's playing at anymore. I understand that he's being threatened and the like, and these issues are out there as usual. But look at a guy like Tommy Robinson. That guy is getting harassed and attacked.
He deals with lots of threats.
There is Anne-Marie. Yeah, and there's Anne-Marie Waters as well, who I've spoken to on my channel, on one of my Philosopher chats. She's running as leader, trying to run as leader of UKIP. So that might make some positive changes, but of course they're trying to make sure that she doesn't she doesn't get the vote, because she's polling 80% at the moment. So Anne-Marie Waters is kind of like another Tommy Robinson-esque character who's very much against Islam, and I was really impressed by the discussion I had with her. So there's a silver lining there if she becomes the leader of UKIP, for example. So yeah, that gives you some inkling of some potential positives there. But of course, you know, we've got the situation with the migrant crisis is still ongoing, no matter what. I mean, I watched a program the other day on Brexit on BBC, and they said, oh well, the migrant crisis is over. No, it isn't. You know that there's migrant boats coming in every day, all the time, with these NGOs. Sailing them over from Libya to Sicily, as I've already said. So these problems are ongoing, and of course, you know, white genocide is still a very real issue. We're getting replaced in our own countries, and if we don't wake up, then within a couple of generations, we're going to be minorities in the last homelands we have left in Europe. You know, so it's not a great situation in that regard.
Well, we left people with a little bit of black pill because we are coming up upon the hour, but I wanted my viewers to know where they can find you so they can watch some of your amazing content.
Well, the best place would be rockingphilosophy.com. You'll find a link to most of my accounts there. The only ones you won't find is Minds and Gab. But yeah, most places where people are active, you'll find me having a presence there, like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Of course, is my main base. I've got my Rocking Philosophy. I do some blog posts there as well. And of course, I've already mentioned Gab and Minds, and I'm also on VidMe at the moment as a backup as well, because there's a lot of uncertainty about where YouTube's going for the future as well.
It's continuously on my day timer to get my own VidMe account, so I definitely need to do that as well. So thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Everybody go check out his channel, which I will have linked down below. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.